Hello, everybody. My name is Letty Rising, and today we are going to be talking about formative assessment strategies for small group lessons. So this webinar is going to be very practical because I'm going to be giving you a lot of different tips and tricks on how to do formative assessment when you're giving lessons and presentations in small groups. This is designed with thinking about a Montessori classroom or a individualized classroom in mind. Because a traditional school will be doing this, could do this possibly in a whole group setting, but we're looking at strategies that work especially well in smaller groups. So before we get started, I just wanted to kind of go over for just a moment, what is formative assessment? So formative assessments help teachers identify concepts that students are struggling to understand. Also, helps them with skills that they are having difficulty acquiring or learning standards that they haven't yet met, so that there can be adjustments made to the lessons or the instructional techniques, and that there can be some sort of academic or instructional support. The overall goal is to collect information that can be used to improve teaching and learning while it's happening, so in real time. So this is very different than a summative assessment, where a summative assessment will look at what the child has learned and sort of make an evaluation around that. Formative assessments are evaluating the child's learning process along the way, so that it can help the teacher plan to make sure that they are giving work to the children that is at their perfect level of challenge, that's not too easy or not too hard. And formative assessments help you identify what the child has learned so that it can help you with your future planning. So without formative assessments, the first indication that a student doesn't grasp a material would be when they fail a quiz or a test, or they don't do well on some sort of a standardized measure. And we want to prevent that. That really isn't in alignment with best practices as we understand it. So we definitely want to make sure that we are giving students formative assessments, so that we are making sure that they are learning and growing, and that we are making sure that we are hitting their targets in terms of their learning targets, and making sure that they are progressing in a way that is supportive and helps them gain greater understanding of content and skills. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different formative assessment strategies that can be used in small group lessons or presentations. Many of these are going to involve something called checking for understanding. So a lot of times when a new teacher is giving lessons, there's a big focus on getting through the presentations and making sure that these topics have been covered and the students have been exposed to things. But there is a really important piece that sometimes is missing, which is that you really need to make sure that you are checking for understanding, which means when you gather children for a lesson, and before you begin your presentation, you want to make sure that they understand whatever concepts or skills that are needed in order to go into the next lesson, in order to go to the next step. You want to make sure that they understand the math concept before the one that you're going to teach today, because if they don't understand that, then you need to stop your lesson, or you need to disinvite a couple of people from that lesson in a very polite way and have them, reteach them what they need to know so they can have that lesson another time. So you want to make sure you're checking for understanding. And it's very easy to do that in a lesson where, maybe you are going to start doing addition of fractions with uncommon denominators. So then you might be saying, okay, How about everybody does a few addition problems with common denominators, and you see, you kind of check, and they write a few problems down, and you see that they understand that, and you're like, oh, okay, they're ready to move on to uncommon denominators. But if they forget to do that, if they're adding things incorrectly, coming up with different numbers, then you're like, okay, I'm not going to have them go into that. So I'm going to back up a little bit with that child or those children. So you're going to be checking for understanding at the beginning of lessons before you give them. And you're also going to be using strategies that involve checking for understanding after you give a lesson, so that you can kind of see if they understood the content or the skill that you taught them, and if they're ready to go and work independently on that and continue to practice that till they have developed mastery. Obviously, when you're teaching a new lesson, they often won't get it right away. That's why we need to practice things, or they may not have absorbed all of the information, but they should have absorbed enough for them to be able to move on and do some work with that, so they can practice it and refine it and get better. If not, then you're going to need to adjust some of your strategies. So let's talk through several different ideas for formative assessments in small group settings. One strategy is open-ended questioning. So using open-ended questions allows you to really determine the depth and the breadth of the student learning. You want to ask students questions that can't be answered with a yes or a no or a one-word answer. Open-ended questions require students to think about their answers and to use their knowledge and understanding about a topic in their responses. So questions that involve words such as why and how often encourage deeper thinking. So you don't want to be asking them things that just involve a yes or no, because that doesn't really go into a lot of depth for them, and it's not very productive in that way. So you want to ensure that you are asking things that involve complex answers, and why, how, what, when, who, any of those kinds of questions are going to elicit more complex and in-depth answers rather than a yes or a no. So open-ended questioning is a really great strategy to use as a formative assessment, and then the children can kind of tell you a little bit about what they know. If you ask them something that says yes or no, they can just take a guess, and because they're going to be 50% of the time they'll be right, and maybe they're guessing yes or no and they don't even know, and they said yes, but and that was the right answer, but they didn't really know, and then you're like, oh great, they know what I'm talking about, and then you move on. And you don't want to be doing that. You want to be careful about that. Another strategy you can use, this is something that tends to be used in traditional education sometimes, but it's great. It's a great thing to do in a small group as well. It's called the thumbs up and thumbs down strategy. So you want to use the thumbs up and thumbs down strategy with your students as a way to determine whether they understood the information that was presented. So after you introduce some new skill or concept or new content, do a quick comprehension check to see if the student understands the information that was presented. Ask the students to give you a thumbs up if they understand and a thumbs down if they don't understand, and they need more information. So, say, okay, just give me a thumbs up if you understood what I was talking about. Give me a thumbs down if you're a little confused. And then sometimes as a teacher, I'll be like, you can put it in the middle if you're understood some of it, but you're a little bit confused. Honestly, if kids go like this, it's because they're afraid to go like this a lot of the time. So if they are somewhere in the middle, that tells you that they actually probably need a little more help than they're saying. Some children are very self-conscious and shy about admitting things that they do not know. So you just need to be extra careful about that. So thumbs up or thumbs down or thumbs in the middle is another good way to do it. So that's one strategy. Another very simple, easy strategy that hopefully most schools and teachers use is oral discussions. So you want to ask them to talk about what they know about a topic or a concept with each other. You could do it before the lesson begins, and you can also do it after the lesson ends. Having a group discussion before or after a lesson can provide you with valuable information regarding what your students know about a subject. It focuses the discussions on higher level thinking skills and gives the students a few minutes to reflect on their learning before they begin a discussion. And also you want to reflect on it after the discussion as well. I mean, you could do it before or after. So encourage the students to share what they have learned and how that knowledge may have an impact on their daily lives. You also want to brainstorm ways that knowledge could be transferred to other subject areas or situations the students might come across. It's always great in Montessori settings that you can connect something that you learned in this lesson to another lesson, and you can say, how is this related to something we learned about yesterday, or a topic we covered in geometry or geography or history the other day? And so that can get a really fruitful discussion happening and help them make interconnections across different subjects. You also want to, when you're doing that, listen carefully to the responses given by students, and that will provide useful information for you as you plan future instruction. You may even want to actually have like a little notebook with you and jot down as they're discussing, you're going to jot down maybe some points that they make that make you think, oh yeah, I want to address that in another lesson, or that's a good thing to bring up that I can consider in another way. So their oral discussions can be very lively, and you can be taking notes while they're having those important conversations. Another strategy that you can use when you do a small group lesson, and you'll want to do this strategy if you want to have an even number of students when you are employing this strategy, is called think, pair, share. So the think, pair, share strategy is a great way to gather information about the level of understanding for your students. It's a quick and easy strategy that can be used a number of times throughout a lesson. So you can ask students questions such as, you know, what did you learn in today's lesson? Or what connections can you make to your own life based on what you've learned so far? So give the students a few minutes to think about that. And then you want to pair them up with a partner to discuss their responses. And the students can share their thoughts with each other, and then they can join the larger group. So maybe you have a group of 4 students you're giving a lesson to, or a group of 6 students you're giving a lesson to, and you're going to pair them off into 2 groups of 2. And then they can have, you know, a dialogue with each other, and then you can bring them together and they can talk in the group of 6 and talk about what they talked about in their pairs and bring some new understanding to the entire group. Their discussions can really help you as a teacher gain valuable insight into their understanding of a topic or concept. And again, this is a great time for you to have your notebook and be a little bit listening in as you're sitting by and you're listening to the conversations that they're having. You may need to, at the beginning, be scaffolding these conversations and supporting these conversations a little bit, and being an active sort of participant in them and helping prompt them in their thinking at the beginning. So if you try this right away and the students are sitting with each other as in a pair and they're not really talking and they're not sure how to move forward with that, that means you really want to be actively scaffolding what the process is about and modeling that so that they get the idea of what needs to happen. Another idea, you know, some of these ideas have funny little names that I've come up with, and some of them are names that other people have come up with. This particular one is called 3, 2, 1 countdown. So with this particular strategy, you want to give the child a lesson, and then you're going to, maybe it's going to be a story lesson, and you give them a nice, long, interesting story lesson, and then they're going to talk about, you're going to ask them, can you please write down or talk about 3 things that you didn't know before that you learned about in this lesson? 2 things that surprised you about this topic, and 1 thing you want to do with what you've learned. So that's an example. You can actually ask them all different kinds of questions. It doesn't have to be those. These are just suggestions, so feel free to make up your own. But, children like numbers and counting, and so, if you tell them, why don't you list 3 things that you found most exciting, 2 things you didn't really find interesting, and 1 thing that you would change if you could change this lesson somehow. I mean, I'm just giving an example, but you could do anything with a 3, 2, 1, like write down 3 things of this, 2 things of this, and 1 thing of this. And they really do enjoy lists. A lot of children who are reluctant writers will be much more excited about writing with lists. And so that's something you might want to consider when you're thinking about different kinds of formative assessment strategies. Another strategy you might want to employ is called the 1-minute essay. So the 1-minute essay is a quick formative assessment strategy that allows you to gauge student understanding of a particular topic. So you're going to pose a question to the students and then have the students respond. Then you're going to tell the students they have 1 minute to write down their response. You want to ensure that the question you ask can be answered in about a minute. So you might want to not ask them a question that involves that's either super in-depth or it has maybe 3 or 4 questions within 1 question. Anyway, you want to use questions that will cause students to reflect on their learning and make personal connections with their own lives. Anything that you can do to relate to their own lives is going to be something that they're going to highly value and be very excited about. So you want to really kind of be thinking about that. If you are familiar with something called Bloom's taxonomy, you can you could Google Bloom's taxonomy, and there's lots of different kinds of questions that are open-ended, higher order thinking kinds of questions that you can use as starters if you're not sure how to pose a question. So you want to, really use questions that involve the higher order thinking. Again, we're trying to stay away from the yes, no, because it doesn't give us very much information. Okay, so another way that we can use formative assessments in small group lessons is our follow-up work. So we give the presentation, we give a lesson, and then the children choose follow-up work. So they can do, follow-up work involves projects that demonstrate comprehension, right? I mean, that's kind of what's happening. They're demonstrating mastery or understanding of concepts that they've learned or some sort of content. So as we know, if you're a Montessori teacher, there are so many different kinds of cool things that children can do as follow-up activities that are wonderful projects that they can take on. They can create a poster or a collage. Posters are very popular things to do. They can do booklets. They can create a diorama. And they can, maybe even rehearse a skit or or they can even create a podcast using a podcast that would be involved, that would involve the topics that were covered in the lesson. If you want to get kind of into the tech part, they could do a podcast or a PowerPoint or some sort of a presentation or a YouTube video. You can have them design their own flashcards and they can quiz their peers. They can make a little booklet. They can make a timeline. They can sew some sort of a project that, maybe they're sewing geometric shapes onto a pillow because they were learning about different geometric shapes. The possibilities are endless, and the children really like to collaborate in choosing projects for this type of formative assessment. And I think it's a really, ideal and important that you as a teacher would do that. Okay, another kind of formative assessment that could be fun is something called an ABC list. Now, I'm well aware that I live in the United States, and not everybody who will be watching this webinar may have the same type of alphabet that in their country of origin. But in the US, we have the alphabet, which starts with ABC. And one fun thing to do that actually was an idea inspired by, or I first heard about it from a AMI elementary trainer, is to have students brainstorm words related to the topic that you were learning about. Like, let's say you gave a lesson on parts of the leaf. And so you said, okay, so let's write the whole alphabet down on the side of a piece of paper from top to bottom, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way to the letter Z. And then I want you to think of one word starting with A that is related to the leaf, one word that starts with B, and etc. And they can go through the entire alphabet and challenge them to use as many letters of the alphabet as they can. They could do this in a group. This would be a little bit more challenging to do with lower elementary children, but it would be a great idea for upper elementary children. They can make a list and try to find one word that's related to the lesson, like, for example, when they get to the letter P, they might use the word photosynthesis. When they're with L, they might use leaf, and when they're at S, they might it might be stem. So there's all sorts of things, when they are at F, they might use food. So many different ideas, but it's a great kind of way to get them thinking. Another great fun thing to do as a formative assessment strategy in a small group lesson is to use a little whiteboard. So there are these tiny little whiteboards that students can use that are, the size of a piece of paper. And I'm not sure why this is, but for whatever reason, children love using whiteboards or even chalkboards more than they prefer using paper sometimes. Maybe it's the impermanence of it, I don't know. But if you give each student a whiteboard and maybe you're giving the lesson, and when you're finished with the lesson, you can have them write a little couple of sentences on the whiteboard and share it. Or if you are doing a math problem, they can quickly write down their problem and then they can share it with everybody. So if they each have a little whiteboard that they can erase, it makes it really fun for them. And this makes it easy for you to see if they are grasping the knowledge and if they're understanding things. And it's a quick and easy way for you to see that too. So they can write something on a whiteboard, show it to you, you look at everybody's and you're like, oops, this person's having a hard time. Of course, you're not gonna yell that out, oh, you're having a hard time, but you're gonna take note of that and you're gonna adjust your instruction accordingly. And, they can also write down sentences and symbolize and use grammar symbols to symbolize sentences. There's lots of things they can do with a simple whiteboard because there's lots of colorful dry erase markers that students can use too. And again, it brings more excitement to a lesson. I don't know why, but they are very appealing to the elementary child. Another thing that you want to use, which is going to be something that is very exciting to elementary children, that is a great formative assessment strategy in a small group, is using drawings and illustrations to convey understanding of a concept. So some of your students may only be able to show you what they know by creating a drawing or a series of drawings to demonstrate their understanding. Maybe they are still not yet fluent readers, or they're not yet fluent writers, or they struggle with writing in general, but for whatever reason, they have the drawing down pretty well. So just encourage the students to share their thinking about what they are drawing, so they can encourage them to draw their thoughts and ideas, and then share their thinking orally about their drawing. So that can help you gain insight into what they've learned about that particular lesson. So again, you know, when you're giving a small group lesson, you actually might do a couple of different formative assessment strategies at the same time. For one child, you might say, will you please draw a picture of what you've learned and then talk about it with us? And for another child, you might say, will you write a couple of sentences? Because some children might not be able to write sentences. So the drawing is going to be a really great thing for them to do. Another sort of way of drawing would be graphic organizers. So graphic organizers have many different uses in a classroom. You can use graphic organizers to formally assess students as one type of usage, but they also provide a really nice visual representation of student learning. So, you know, a graphic organizer is some sort of template usually. It's like in a template form. It could be like, for example, a Venn diagram is a graphic organizer where there are two circles and they overlap. So there's the middle pieces of the two circles overlap with each other. That is an example of a graphic organizer. So students complete the template with their thoughts and their understandings about something. And you can do a huge Google search, and you will be provided with many different examples and templates to use. You know, if you want to assess your students on how well they can sequence something, like sequencing ideas or sequencing events in a story, you can Google sequencing graphic organizers. You can, if you want some that are related to science, you can Google science graphic organizers. There are many different kinds of graphic organizers for every grade level, for every topic, every subject. You just need to look online. Some children really take well to graphic organizers because they provide a certain kind of structure that they really enjoy. So, gosh, there's just so many ideas here. I can't even know where to, it's hard to know where to start, you know? Anyway, I'm hoping that you're enjoying all these different ideas, because it's really good elementary children do like variety. And if we're going to be doing formative assessment strategies, trying a variety of different ones makes it interesting when you are giving a lesson. And I just want to kind of add here that you don't have to be, giving some sort of formative assessment that involves them writing something every single time. You definitely want to check for understanding every time you give a lesson somehow, and that you can do that orally. But, try not to feel like that make it so that you are trying to quiz the child. You don't want them to think you are there trying to quiz them to see how much they know. You want to be very casual and natural about it. Okay, so another type of formative assessment that you can use for small groups is the one-sentence summary. So you want to ask students to provide you with a one-sentence summary of what they've learned, and that can help provide you with information about what the students know about a particular topic. So give the students time to reflect on their learning and encourage them to think about their response. The depth of their summaries will indicate their understanding of the topic and it will help provide you with direction and future planning for their lessons. It's also kind of fun because, you know, a lot of children do prefer, you know, writing maybe just a couple of sentences rather than more, but if you tell them it's a one-sentence summary, you're really challenging them to try to get all of that information into one sentence, and that can be a fun challenge in and of itself. So another strategy that you can use is something called the double entry journal. So journals are a great way to formatively assess students and get a window into their thinking. Double entry journals are one form of journaling. So with a double entry journal, you have two columns. On the left column, students write keywords, ideas, or quotations, and then they give their personal response to these words in the right column. So students may include questions that arise out of their responding. And by reading the students' responses, you can assess their knowledge and understanding on the topic that you are studying. Then they can print these phrases in the left-hand column of their journal and respond to them in the right-hand column. Reading over the student responses will provide you with information about student understanding. So you can make it very simple as one side they have keywords, ideas, and quotations, and then on the other side they are giving their personal responses to those words, their thoughts, their ideas, you know, so it's kind of like question response a little bit, and that helps them develop something, develop a very more in-depth understanding of something, and it helps them think about things in a different way. So here's another strategy. It is called examples and non-examples. So encourage your students to provide you with examples and non-examples of a topic being studied. The examples and non-examples provide you with information regarding the depth of understanding of your students. For example, maybe you're doing a lesson on recycling. So you want to ask your students to provide you with examples of recycling and examples that do not involve recycling. Maybe while you are studying or having a lesson on mixtures and solutions in science, or in your geography album, you want to review mixtures and just determine the student understanding by asking students to provide you with examples and non-examples of mixtures. Like, what is an example and what is not an example? Ask the students then to explain their reason for classifying each example and non-example. Elementary children love classification. They find that to be really interesting. So this is actually a really great activity. So for example, if you're giving the lesson on the fundamental needs of humans, you might want to say, okay, what are examples of fundamental needs? And what are not examples of fundamental needs? What are non-examples? So, you know, food is an example of a fundamental need. Candy, I guess you could, there might be interesting arguments around this, but candy is not an example of a fundamental need. You know, so there's lots of different kinds of things that you can talk about, like what are needs versus what are wants, and that can get you into really interesting conversation. Let's see, okay. We are next on, okay, so you can do something called, you can do like a learning log entry or a journal entry. So, so these are notes that students can make during lessons, or they can do it after the lessons. So you can set time aside at the beginning or the end of class, or the beginning or the end of a lesson to write about what they've learned, and list any topics, list any questions about the topic they might have. or make connections between the topic and their own lives. Anytime you can relate something to their own lives is going to be usually a big winner. Learning logs or journal entries provide you with valuable information about what students are learning and possible directions for future instruction. You can use them as a formative assessment strategy as they provide you with information about student learning and what information or skills the students may still need to reach the goals and the outcomes of the lesson. So you can look at it as a reflection, a learning log, a journal entry. There's many different ways you can look at that. Very similar to this is something called the quick write. So a quick write gives teachers a visual of student learning. So you could provide, after you give a lesson or a presentation, you can provide students with an open-ended question and a set amount of time for having them to write from 2, 3, 4 minutes, you know, not longer than 5 minutes. It'll be a short, quick write. And tell the students not to worry about their grammar or their punctuation or anything, but just it's rather really about getting their ideas down on paper, because really you're really looking at their ideas. You want to know, are they understanding the concept? You know, you could set a little timer. You might have like a little sand timer that's 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And when the time is up, you can ask the students then to put their pencils down. And then you can collect those writing samples and you can look through those quick writes for valuable information regarding the knowledge and understanding your students have about a given topic. You can also use the quick write at the beginning of a lesson because it's a really great way to activate prior knowledge for your students, okay? So let's spend 2 minutes and write down everything that we know about erosion, you know? So anything and everything you know, even if you think you don't know very much, just spend some time writing about it. And, you know, maybe if you run out of things to write about, you can draw a little picture demonstrating it. So, so you can do quick writes before or after a lesson, and they can be very valuable. Another thing that you can do is you can do something called list 3 things, but it doesn't have to be 3 things. You could do list 5 things. You can do list 10 things. But for this one, I'll just call it list 3 things. But as the person who's the teacher, when you're giving a formative assessment, you can certainly go beyond that. So the 3 things strategy involves giving each student a piece of paper and having them visually represent, either through words or drawings, 3 things they have learned about the lesson so far, or 3 things they learned from the presentation or the lesson. Tell the students to provide as many details as possible to determine the depth of their understanding. Then you're going to want to have them share with a partner. By talking through their ideas, the students may come up with more details to add. Give the students a couple of minutes to add or make changes to their 3 things, and then have them hand them in so you can take a closer look at what they created. So you can gather these lists and read through them to get an idea of where they are in regards to their understanding. You can also, when you're reading through them, you're gonna notice gaps in learning or misunderstandings, most likely. You're not gonna see that all the time, but you're certainly going to sometimes see that there are going to be gaps in their understanding of things while you're reading through these lists. These gaps and misunderstandings then can be addressed in future lessons. So this is, again, the beautiful thing about formative assessment and using all of these different strategies is that, you know, when you have them apply some thinking and write it down, and then you can see what their thought processes are, that can really help drive your future instruction so that you make sure that you are really following the child and making sure that you are exactly where they need to be. Because the worst thing that you want to do, well, it's not the worst thing in the world, but what you don't want to do is to be continually giving children lessons that they've already had, and so they already know all of that content, and so it's not interesting to them. Or you don't want to give them things that are too hard that they just really can't grasp or understand because they don't have the prior knowledge, the skills, or the understanding that is needed for that. It's just something that you have to really think about when you are working with children. And the thing is that, it's okay to be giving lessons again and again when they don't understand. You should be repeating lessons again. If you are giving the same same content to a child for whatever reason, you need to do it again. I don't know why, but maybe you do. You can always enhance the content. You can always make it much more rich and deeper. You can revisit the fundamental needs of humans when they're in upper elementary in a different way. They can really go into looking at it as an outline for studying a particular civilization and what their fundamental needs are, and really go in depth with it. And whereas a lower elementary child might be looking at one particular aspect of that, such as clothing, food, transportation, and whatnot. So anyway, that was list 3 things. Okay, another great assessment strategy that you will want to use is a product exemplar. So product exemplars are really important things. You want to provide exemplar. An exemplar is an example for students to compare their work. So when writing a narrative paragraph, for example, you want to share with the children a few examples of the type of paragraph you're wanting them to produce. So if you're in a lesson on writing paragraphs, you want them to understand what does that look like, and what is needed in order to have a really high quality, complex, interesting paragraph. Students can compare their narrative paragraphs to the exemplars and determine what they need to change or add to their paragraph to demonstrate mastery of narrative writing for their grade level. So I have done this before, and I really found it to be really interesting because you can get online. I mean, again, I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody living in the United States, and we follow something called the Common Core Standards. So I could get online and I can Google paragraphs for 6th grade Common Core Standards, or excellent paragraphs, and so you can Google, paragraphs for grade levels, and you will find examples of strong paragraphs, examples of paragraphs that are fine, and paragraphs that are not quite up to grade level proficiency. And I have found it really great to share one of each of those with children when I'm working with them. And I'm very careful to not, say anything negative about the writing. I can just say, we have 3 different paragraphs here. What do you notice about these paragraphs? Which one do you think is the best? Which one is your favorite? Why do you feel that way? It's really important. I like to have them compare these different paragraphs, but you don't want to have them compare with each other in the classroom. So please don't take paragraphs from other children in the classroom and talk about and do some comparison, but it's fine to pull some from the online resources, and that would be a really wonderful thing for them to have. And so if you do that, then you can really talk through these, tell us what you like about this one. What do you like about this one? What do you think can be improved in this one? And then you can agree, like, what is an exemplar here? An exemplar means it is a fine example of something that you think is like the best example that you can find. And so usually everybody will agree on that and say, okay, so we know this is an exemplar. And so this is what we want you to be keeping in mind when you're writing, is we want your writing to grow to the exemplar, to be of a similar quality. And so it's so important to do that. I know I once worked with a teacher who was a new teacher, and she had an upper elementary student who was not, he was the oldest in the class, and he was not writing at a level that I would expect for a 12-year-old to be writing. And so I showed her these different examples of, like, he was in 6th grade. So I said, here are different examples. Like, where do you think this child falls in this? And she was like, oh, wow, I see that we have some work to do. I didn't realize that, what an exemplar looked like for a 12-year-old. And I now understand what we are looking for. And so if a teacher needs that, you're going to find that you're going to have students who need that too. So another formative assessment strategy that you can employ in small group lessons, which is actually one of my favorite, and I feel like it is so in alignment with the Montessori method and something that should be happening in all classrooms, is called Teach a Friend. So a good strategy for determining if students understand a concept or process is to have them teach it to a friend. Students need to think about the knowledge and skills needed for understanding and include that information in their teaching. Pair the students up and have them teach their partner about the concept or the skill or the process. And that is going to be an amazing experience for both involved. First of all, if a child is being taught to, there's a good chance that they may have heard this from the teacher before, and now they're hearing it from another student. And so children tend to learn things really well from people who are closer in their age. They're more receptive and more open. And they just feel more connected to people close to their age. They also, elementary children have the very social instinct and the group instinct. So they're very much interested in learning from their peers and really just looking up to their older peers in particular who are in the classroom. But the really amazing gift is, the real true testament of learning is to be able to teach something. So I think, like, of all of these formative assessment strategies, which there are amazing, wonderful ones that I have shared here today, the teaching of something, to having a child do that, you are activating all sorts of parts of their brain, and they have to really know and understand something to teach it. And while they're teaching it, they're learning more about it usually, because while those of you who are teachers, that when you give a lesson or a presentation, sometimes you will develop an insight that you're like, oh, I never thought about that before, just as you're in the middle of teaching it sometimes. So it's an amazing and important quality for children to be able to have the opportunity to teach other children and to be able to have, to do that. And in a Montessori classroom, which is multi-age, there's just so many rich and wonderful opportunities for one child to teach another. And some children who kind of resist something that they might think is a quiz or a test will be really receptive if you go up to them and say, hey, I noticed you've been working on this multiplication material for a long time and you really seem to have it down. And I was wondering if you could go and teach Johnny over here that lesson, because I really am kind of busy. I don't have a lot of time. And I think that that would be a wonderful experience for Johnny to get that lesson from you. You're going to not only have an amazing formative assessment experience for the child, but that's going to really add to their self-esteem and their self-image and make them feel like they are so special, and that's wonderful. So what you'll want to do, though, is if there's a way for you to kind of be off observing, and you're, observing while you're pretending like you're not observing, and you can kind of write down some information as they are teaching that lesson, so that you can make sure that they really understand what they're teaching. And if they do make a little mistake, you can pop over to that other child later on and, give them a reteach so that they can do that. It's not the end of the world if you have a child who gives a lesson to somebody and they make a mistake. It would be more challenging if they make the mistake and you don't catch it and they are doing the incorrect procedure for a very long period of time. But if they do the incorrect procedure once or twice, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. Also, at the end of your lesson, you can also, instead of, you don't have to send a child away and teach a younger child. Maybe you can have them each teach each other. You can have them pair up into pairs and teach each other something. And that could even involve you told a story about the parts of the root, or you were talking about solids, liquids, and gases. And so then you say, okay, I want you to each teach each other a little bit about what you know about solids, liquids, and gases. So how about one of you recreates the experiment and explains it along the way, and then when you're finished, replenish the materials, and then the other one of you recreates the experiment and does it. So you each get a turn being the teacher, and you each get a turn being the child. So that is just a really beautiful way, a formative assessment strategy that you can use. And then you can also really see where there are holes and where there are not holes. So again, here I have given you an entire huge list of formative assessment strategies that you can use in small group lessons and presentations. There are actually lots more. This was just a start, but we don't need to overwhelm people with new ideas and information, because it's always good to start somewhere, and you need to start sort of small, even though I gave you many ideas here today. But the important thing is that when you are doing the formative assessment strategies, when you're giving small group lessons, you are doing formative assessment at the beginning of lessons sometimes. Sometimes you are doing formative assessments at the end of a lesson. And sometimes you can actually be stopping in the middle of a lesson and giving a formative assessment. I know a lot of traditional teachers will do that. I'm not as much inclined to do it in the middle of a lesson, because I don't want to take away from the excitement and the magic of what's happening. And it doesn't feel as organic, but sometimes for whatever reason, people are getting a little squirrely and wiggly and you need to stop something, and then you can insert one of these strategies in the middle and say, okay, let's take just a minute to write down 3 things that you've learned so far, or let's do a quick little whiteboard exercise. Why don't you write down 2 things that you remember, or one question you have that we've about this lesson that we've talked about so far. And then you can also then you're going to want to wrap up your lessons at the end with formative assessments as well. So it's something that can happen at the beginning, the middle, or the end. And, formative assessments, again, the whole entire purpose of them are that you want to be able to see where the children are at, get a snapshot of what their understanding is, so that you can either reteach things, or you can show something using different manipulatives or in a different way, or you can go more slowly, or it's going to help you adjust your approach, because there is not one approach that works well for every child and every time. Children need a wide variety of different approaches, and you might be trying all these different formative assessment techniques that we talked about today, and then you may decide that you're going to settle on 3 or 4 of them that you feel work really well with the children in your classroom, or maybe you really like them. The thing is that a lot of times what we feel excited about and what we enjoy, the children enjoy as well. But there are a few that I recommend that you do, pretty continuously or pretty regularly, which is checking for understanding, asking open-ended questions, oral discussions, think, pair, share, projects, and I'm going to say whiteboards because the children really love them, drawing and illustrations, and a quick write, and teaching a friend. I would say those things should be happening on a pretty regular basis. All of those are things you'll want to integrate into your teaching and learning. Really look at open-ended questions and thinking about the kinds of things that you can talk to or ask your students. And you're going to want to really be infusing your lessons with open-ended questioning. And with all of these formative assessments, don't forget to have your own journal. Teachers need to have their own work journals just as their children have a work journal, and your work journal is going to be packed with observations that you make about the children in your classroom. And you need to have a work journal, so when you give these formative assessments, that you are jotting down notes and taking note of what you're going to want to adjust and how you want to proceed and move forward with the children. If you don't write those things down, you might forget. It's unlike a summative assessment where you might have a computerized assessment that a child did and you have a email or a printout of their results. Formative assessments are very informal and very casual, but you need to treat them as just as important data and information as anything else in the classroom. And you're going to want to jot down your observations, and also many times you're capturing the information in a quick write or something that you can collect and study later on. But if they are doing, if it's oral or if they are doing some sort of a presentation, please be sure to jot down your observations and the things that you hear them say, so that you can make sure you are planning well for them, and that you are meeting each child at their level and their particular need. So this ends our webinar on formative assessment strategies for small group lessons. I hope that you found that to be helpful. There was a lot of practical information. A lot of times teachers are really afraid to try new things, and I encourage you to not get overwhelmed by all of this list of tools that I've shared with you. They're all wonderful strategies, but don't feel like you have to do them all right away. Just pick 2 or 3 that you want to learn more about and try to implement those. And once you feel like you have those 2 or 3 down and you feel pretty successful, then you might want to try some new ones. But remember, you want to just bite off a little bit at a time. And I want to also encourage you to not be afraid, because a lot of times we are afraid, but true courage is being afraid of something but doing it anyway. So just jump in and try and take a risk and model to your students taking a risk and trying new things, and that's going to be an amazing experience for them to see as well. don't be afraid that you're going to make a mistake or mess it up. You know, you're trying new formative assessment strategies, and you're going to find a rhythm of what works for you, and it's going to really help you personalize and individualize the instruction that you give for the children. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure to be giving this webinar today, and I hope everybody has a beautiful day. Bye.